picture this. You're standing right in the middle of the Great Bear Rainforest in British Columbia.
Oh man, it is so claustrophobic out there.
Exactly. The canopy above you is like so thick it completely blocks out the sky, and it is relentlessly pouring freezing rain.
The kind of rain that just soaks right through your gear and into your bones.
Yes, it's brutal. And everywhere you look, there are just these massive ancient cedar trees looming out of the fog. So keep that scene in your mind, because our mission for today's deep dive is to unpack a really terrifying stack of sources.
Yeah, we've got incident reports, secure comms logs, and biological findings detailing a seemingly impossible weaponized event.
Right, and to really grasp what we're dealing with, we have to start at the crime scene.
For sure. So the incident reports detail the horrifying death of a logging CEO named Marcus Vance.
Which is just a wild read.
Oh, absolutely. He was found dead inside this heavily reinforced steel safe room at a location known as Clear Cut Site 44. But the bizarre part is, the bunker wasn't blown up.
Right, no explosive charges or anything.
Nope. Nobody brought in heavy mining equipment either. The steel was just slowly, methodically crushed down to the size of a refrigerator.
I mean, a solid steel box crumpled like a piece of tinfoil?
Yeah, and the perpetrators. According to the physical evidence, it was the surrounding forest itself.
The ancient cedar trees actually crushed the bunker.
Yeah, they did.
Okay, let's unpack this, because we're looking at a scenario where a forest literally executed a man.
It sounds like science fiction.
Totally. But before we get into the mechanics of how that is even possible, I do want to set some context for you listening.
Yeah, that's important.
The sources we're looking at are caught right in the crossfire of some highly charged conflicts, right? Between industrial logging interests and radical environmental protesters.
Clearly highly charged.
But we are stripping all the politics away today. We are not taking any sides here. We are focusing strictly on the terrifying mechanics of the crime scene itself.
And that really is the best approach. Because what's fascinating here is that this wasn't some supernatural occurrence, you know? It wasn't magic. We are looking at a highly calculated, devastating application of physics and biology. And to understand how a forest crushes a steel bunker, we actually need to look at the clash of methodologies between the investigators standing in the mud at Site 44.
Oh my gosh, I am absolutely obsessed with this part of the field notes.
It is quite the scene.
The culture clash is just staggering. You have agents from the Behavioral Probability Unit who have crossed international borders. They left their sterile high-tech labs behind and hiked 3 miles deep into this freezing mud.
Yeah, and waiting for them in the downpour is Corporal Kaylin Gray of the RCMP Eco-Crimes Task Force.
Yes, and the dynamic is just completely fraught from the second they meet.
Oh, totally. I mean, you have a team that relies entirely on data, algorithms, predictive modeling, and they are suddenly thrust into an environment that is raw, unpredictable, and entirely indifferent to their technology.
Corporal Gray just completely owns the scene, though.
She really does.
Like, Agent Hatch's field notes describe her casually wiping rain off her rifle, completely in her element, while these city agents are just freezing.
Yeah, they are totally out of their depth.
And then Agent Elias, who is one of the analysts for the Behavioral Probability Unit, actually pulls out his tablet to try and run a probability matrix on the structural collapse of the steel bunker.
Which is just hilarious in that setting.
Right, and Gray just shuts him down immediately. She tells Elias his math cannot stop a grizzly bear.
A great line.
It's so good. And she points out to Agent Jax that all of his fancy orbital satellites cannot see a single thing through the dense tree canopy anyway.
Yeah, she essentially forces them to look at the physical reality right in front of them. Elias is over there trying to calculate explosive yields or mechanical leverage.
And Gray just points to the shattered earth around the bunker.
Exactly.
But, I mean, I have to push back here for a second. Reading through this, I kept thinking, why even bring a probability unit to a wilderness crime scene in the first place?
It does seem like a mismatch.
It's like bringing a calculator to a mud wrestling match. What good is a predictive behavioral analyst going to do against ancient trees?
Well, it seems counterintuitive until you realize the sheer unprecedented nature of the physical evidence.
Right, okay.
They were brought in because the physics simply didn't make sense to traditional law enforcement. But it is Corporal Gray who grounds the investigation.
Yeah, she looks at Elias and says, put the tablet away. This isn't math. It's hydraulic pressure.
All right, hydraulic pressure.
So let's talk about the mechanics of that, because hydraulic pressure sounds, I don't know, industrial, not biological.
It does, but think about a growing tree root. If you've ever seen a tiny, fragile-looking root slowly lift and crack a solid concrete sidewalk. You have witnessed hydraulic pressure.
Oh, yeah, you see that in the city all the time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Plant cells take in water, and as they expand, they push outward. It is this slow, relentless force.
Right.
So Gray explains that if you can somehow force an entire massive cedar trunk to bend, the amount of pressure it exerts is astronomical. We are talking roughly 10,000 pounds per square inch.
Wait, 10,000 psi?
Yes, 10,000.
That is insane.
To put that into perspective, that is more pressure than you would experience at the bottom of the deepest trenches in the ocean.
Oh my gosh.
So Gray looks at this crushed safe room and delivers this incredibly chilling line to the behavioral probability unit.
Oh, I know the one you mean.
She says, nature just slowly squeezed him to death. Your unsub didn't bring a bomb. He brought a watering can.
A watering can. I mean, which sounds almost absurd until you look at the timeline.
Right.
Because knowing these trees exert 10,000 psi of hydraulic pressure immediately introduces a massive biological problem for the agents.
A huge one.
Agent Cross confirmed the structural failure of the bunker, but he noted something crucial. Trees do not naturally move that fast.
No, they definitely don't.
Like you said, it takes decades for a tree root to crack concrete. But this safe room was crushed practically overnight. So how did the killers speed up time?
Well, this is where we get into the findings from medical examiner Dr. Eris Thorne.
Okay, yeah.
Thorne ends up collaborating really closely with Corporal Gray. He takes core samples of the bent cedar trees that crushed the bunker.
And what he finds is just wild.
It completely flips our understanding of plant biology. Thorne discovers that the killer used a synthetic auxin.
Auxin, AUXIN. I know that is a plant growth hormone, but how does it actually work in this context?
So in nature, auxins regulate how a plant grows. Normally, plant cell walls are quite rigid. Think of them like tough cardboard boxes holding a water balloon.
Okay, I can picture that.
But Thorne discovers the killer used a hyper-concentrated, artificially synthesized version of this hormone.
Right.
And when this synthetic auxin hits the tree, it essentially dissolves the chemical bonds holding those rigid cell walls together.
Wait, so the cardboard box gets soft?
Precisely. The walls become incredibly flexible, and water rushes into the cells at an unprecedented rate.
So the water balloons just balloon in size.
Exactly. And when you multiply that expansion by billions of cells inside a massive cedar tree, the physical mass of the trunk expands outward with the force of an industrial press.
Wow.
Thorne calls this artificially induced process hyperturgor. It forced the plant cells to elongate at 50,000 times their normal rate.
50,000 times? Okay, it's basically like pumping a bodybuilder full of the most intense experimental steroids on the planet.
That's a great analogy.
But instead of muscle tissue, you are rapidly expanding bark, sap, and leaves. And it is happening in a matter of hours.
Yeah, and the delivery method Gray finds in the mud proves this wasn't just some localized injection.
Oh, right, the ferns.
Yeah, Gray finds severe chemical burns on the sword ferns growing around the base of the cedars. The burns indicate an aerosol mist.
Which means they sprayed the whole area.
Exactly. The killer, who the task force has dubbed the arborist, used crop duster drones. They literally gassed the entire grid coordinate with this synthetic hormone.
Okay, but spraying a forest with hormones doesn't aim the trees. That is the puzzle that really bothered me when I was reading the files.
It's the biggest missing piece, yeah.
Because even if you make a tree grow 50,000 times faster, it still generally grows straight up toward the sky. I mean, that is just what trees do.
Right.
How does a massive cedar suddenly bend 90 degrees horizontally to crush a steel bunker resting on the ground?
Well, you've hit on the exact biological hurdle the killer had to overcome.
Okay.
You can't just throw a growth hormone at a forest and expect it to magically target a specific man in a specific bunker.
Right, it doesn't make sense.
The killer had to manipulate the underlying rules of nature to aim this growth.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the breakthrough comes from the secure comms logs of the behavioral probability unit.
Yes, Agent Hatch figures it out.
Right. Agent Hatch is staring at this exact puzzle. How do you tell a mindless, mutated tree to attack a steel box in the pitch black of the rainforest?
And Hatch remembers high school biology. Plants grow toward the light.
Phototropism.
Exactly, phototropism.
We've all seen it. You put a houseplant near a window, and after a few days, it leans toward the glass to get the sun.
Yep.
But in the pitch-dark Great Bear Rainforest, there is no sun.
No sun at all.
So Agent Jack starts scanning the electronic footprint of the crime scene, and she tracks a localized radio frequency emitting from the bunker's own roof.
Right. The killer planted a high-intensity artificial sun.
Which is just brilliant.
Specifically, it was a UV laser beacon positioned directly on top of the victim's safe room.
It is so sinister when you think about it. The killer gasses the trees with the hyper-turgor aerosol, then waits for the dead of night, pitch dark.
Yeah.
And then he remotely turns on this blinding UV laser beacon sitting right above Marcus Vance.
And the mutated hyperaccelerated trees desperately want light.
Yes. So they aggressively grow horizontally, bending 90 degrees, reaching for that artificial sun.
And in the process, they bring that 10,000 psi of hydraulic pressure straight down onto the bunker.
Unbelievable.
It is like turning the forest into a massive, slow-motion, heat-seeking missile. But instead of tracking a thermal exhaust port, it's tracking a UV beacon.
The sheer terror of being in that box, though. I mean, you are sitting in an impenetrable safe room designed to withstand explosives, and the steel walls just start groaning and bowing inward.
It's a nightmare scenario.
You have no idea what is happening, and there is absolutely nothing you can do to stop it.
Corporal Gray summarizes it perfectly in the comms logs. She calls it a biological smart bomb.
That is the perfect term for it.
Think about the synthesis of methods here.
Yeah.
You have a purely natural organic process, phototropism, which has existed since the dawn of plant life.
Right.
But it's weaponized with technological precision.
Right.
You have hyper-concentrated synthetic chemistry delivered by drones and a remote-controlled UV laser array.
It's so meticulously planned.
By combining these elements, the unsub completely bypassed heavily reinforced steel defenses.
Because a traditional explosive would have triggered alarms or maybe even failed to breach the armor?
Exactly. But the trees just kept pressing, cell by cell, multiplying 50,000 times faster than normal until the steel finally gave way.
So what does this all mean? If a biological smart bomb can crush a reinforced steel bunker, you have to ask, what is the upper limit of this weapon?
And that realization is exactly what shifts the entire tone of the incident reports.
Yeah, things get really tense.
The Behavioral Probability Unit sets up a mobile command center at the forest edge, and Elias and Gray have a terrifying epiphany.
The horrifying death of Marcus Vance wasn't the end game.
No, it was a beta test.
A beta test, that is just chilling.
Precisely. The unsub, the arborist, was simply testing whether the synthetic auxin and the UV beacon strategy could successfully breach a hardened steel structure.
Right, they were gathering data on their own weapon.
Yeah, and Agent Cross runs the logical progression. If the killer can crush steel, it means he is preparing for something harder. Concrete.
And Gray instantly knows the real target. She points to a map. The Silver Creek Hydroelectric Dam.
Which is located just 3 miles downriver from the crime scene.
We need to give some context on this dam because it really grounds the unsub's motivation and explains why the stakes are so astronomically high.
It's crucial context.
According to the background files, 40 years ago, the construction of the Silver Creek Dam flooded a massive valley. This valley consisted of sacred indigenous land and thousands of acres of ancient old-growth forest.
Yeah.
The reports note that the radical group known as the Arborists has been actively protesting the dam's existence for a decade. So Elias runs the terrifying scenario.
And the math on this scenario is just apocalyptic.
It really is.
If the killer uses those crop duster drones to spray the massive dense forest immediately surrounding the dam, and then drops a UV beacon directly onto the concrete dam wall.
The entire forest reaches for the dam.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The hydraulic force of hundreds of giant cedars bending and growing at 50,000 times their normal rate simultaneously will absolutely shatter the concrete.
And if that concrete shatters, the dam bursts.
Yes.
And the logging town located in the valley right below the dam gets completely wiped off the map by a wall of water. Millions of gallons just erasing everything in its path.
It's unthinkable destruction.
It is literally nature taking revenge, the forest breaking the dam that drowned its own kind. But practically speaking, for the agents on the ground, how does law enforcement even fight a forest?
It's a logistical nightmare.
Like, you can't put handcuffs on a cedar tree. You can't negotiate with a root system.
No, you can't. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it exposes the terrifying vulnerability of our modern infrastructure to environmental manipulation.
Absolutely.
We build these massive concrete and steel structures, dams, bunkers, bridges, and we assume they are permanent triumphs over nature.
We assume we've conquered the environment.
Right. But this case demonstrates that our infrastructure is only safe because nature operates on a slow timeline.
Wow, that is a crazy thought.
If someone figures out how to weaponize that timeline to speed up natural growth using synthetic auxins, All of our concrete and steel is completely defenseless against the sheer physical weight and hydraulic pressure of the natural world.
It flips the script entirely. The behavioral probability unit is used to tracking digital footprints, analyzing financial records, and finding behavioral ticks in human psychology.
Yeah, now they have to figure out a way to stop a botanical weapon.
Which leads to Corporal Gray's final, incredibly gritty call to action in the logs. She looks at these city data analysts standing in the mobile command center and says, "Suit up. I'm taking you into the deep woods."
It is such a striking image. You have these elite quantitative analysts having to trade their tablets for rain gear and rifles,
Yeah.
stepping out into an environment where their usual analytical tools are completely useless. It demands a total reevaluation of what they consider an investigation and what we consider a weapon.
So to wrap up what we've covered today, we are looking at a terrifying synthesis of botany, chemistry, and targeted terrorism.
Really?
We started with a crushed steel bunker and a murdered CEO, and unpacked how a killer manipulated the mechanics of turgor pressure to force trees to grow 50,000 times their normal rate.
And we saw how the killer aimed that 10,000 psi of hydraulic force using artificial UV light.
Turning ancient trees into biological smart bombs to bypass modern defenses. It is a wild reminder for all of us.
For sure.
We usually think of nature as slow, passive, peaceful, just a quiet backdrop to our lives.
But this intelligence shows that with just a few slight biochemical tweaks, the natural world around us holds unfathomable destructive power that we completely take for granted.
Exactly. Which leaves us with a massive cliffhanger from these sources. What are the odds that the behavioral probability unit and a Canadian ranger can stop a forest from breaking a dam?
I have no idea.
Grab your rain gear, because that's exactly the math these agents have to figure out.
It is certainly a probability matrix I wouldn't want to calculate in the mud.
Seriously. But before we go, I want to leave you with one final, deeply unsettling thought to mull over.
Oh boy.
We've been talking about the Great Bear Rainforest, right? Massive ancient cedars that already weigh tons. But the underlying science here, the synthetic auxin, accelerates all plant life by dissolving cell walls and forcing rapid water intake.
Right.
So what would happen if a modified, highly stable version of this chemical leached into our global agricultural supply chain?
Oh man.
Or seeped into our urban groundwater? Would our very cities be torn apart in a matter of days by the dandelions and weeds growing in the sidewalk cracks?
That is a terrifying thought.
It wouldn't take ancient trees to bring down a civilization, just the grass under our feet desperately reaching for the light. Think about that the next time you go for a walk in the woods.